Welcome to the CISSP Cyber Training Podcast, where we provide you the training and tools you need to pass the CISSP exam the first time. Hi, my name is Sean Gerber, and I'm your host for this action-packed, informative podcast. Join me each week as I provide the information you need to pass the CISSP exam and grow your cybersecurity knowledge. All right, let's get started. How y'all doing this wonderful day? It's a great day here in the United States. It's after the New Year, so life is good. I can't complain at all. It's actually in Wichita, Kansas, where I'm basically recording this podcast from. The weather is a balmy 45 degrees, and it's been quite pleasant. So it's for this time of year, it's actually quite strange for it to have this happen. But if you want to believe in global warming, heck, that'll work too. It doesn't really matter at this point. The temperature is really nice, but because it can change next week. But I was looking at the forecast, and actually through the middle of January, it looks pretty promising. For this winter, it's already starting off to pretty much be a very mild winter. The expectation, hopefully, is that it's not going to be an excruciatingly hot summer, because here it gets to be like the surface of the sun. Come July, everything melts and blows away. So it's kind of like a desert in many cases. But I hope everybody's done well this past week and had a great Christmas season. And we're now rolling into a brand new year of 2020. And I hope that all of you out there are taking your CISSP exam this year, have already set up some goals to get your test studying done and to be passing the exam the first time, right? That's the ultimate goal, because taking this test is a bugger and it is expensive, and plus you're putting your time into it. So you really want to pass this the first time. Also noticed that recently there has been a couple of recent incidences that have had some large breaches. So if you are a cybersecurity professional and this is what you want to do with your career, you definitely need to get this stuff done and get out there, because it's an interesting world that we live in, and more of our integrated systems are all basically integrated, and they're all connected. Having cybersecurity professionals out there that understand what to do is a lifeblood of the world, because everything is interconnected. If you are taking your test this in 2020, you need to get this done ASAP. If you are thinking about it on the fence, you just need to do it. And then what we'll do is through Reduce Cyber Risk, we'll also have some for you to get a good study plan put together on how you want to get there, because a lot of it comes down to is having somebody that can help you and keep you accountable for getting the studying done, and just being ready to take the test. It's pretty interesting how the world is changing, and I would recommend it, especially being a CISO myself and being a chief security officer with a very large company. I learn a lot every day, and having this knowledge of security has really been a instrumental part in helping protect my company, as well as just helping me grow as a person. But today we're going to talk about software development, and strange as it may sound, as a security professional, I actually have the development team works for me, and I also have some developers that are in India working for me as well. So the interesting part about all this is I've had to talk to them through the software development lifecycle. And I will love to say that it is perfect. No, it's far from it. But I've learned some valuable lessons doing this, and we'll roll that into today's podcast and what you're going to see as it relates to what the test is going to ask you about, but then also some real life experience around how to handle the software aspects of this. So we're going to go into the first article we're going to get to is a company. It's basically the reference is Raygun, and it's raygun.com. And they basically have the SDLC, 7 phases and popular models, benefits, and more. And so this is important for you to know. You're going to be quizzed on this on the CISSP exam. So it's important to understand what is SDLC and how does it work. And so as we get started here, what is SDLC? It's a software, it's a complex product that's developed and delivered through a series of steps. Okay, so that's the canned answer from Raygun. And it's developing software because it takes a lot of time to do. It has a series of steps that you have to have delivered. And you need to understand how to get to that point. And it becomes from a documentation standpoint, perhaps a prototype, other different methods that you may use, but you have to use these steps to get from point A to point B. And what I've learned in the development team that works for me is we would come in and we would develop, and we'd have an enhancement or a piece to a website that needs to be added. Then that's the idea. So then you have to break it down, and as you break it down, you figure out, okay, what pieces and parts can be done in this period of time. Now we're going to get into waterfall and agile methods for getting work done, and there's different schools of thought around that. But you have to, whatever you decide to pick for your methodology to get this product working from the beginning, from an idea to the completion stage, you just need to develop it under a secure auspice. How do I want to do this in a way that'll best protect the code, but also protect the company that's putting that out there. And so eventually the software is delivered to the customer, but you need to consider the steps from SDLC, which is your software development lifecycle. Now, I've also seen it as SDLC, which is secure software development lifecycle, but what I would really challenge a little bit around that is all software should be developed from a secure standpoint rather than just saying this version is an SDLC and this version is secure. You really need to focus on the fact that all code that's created should have a level of security built into it. Now, you're going to find out that many developers, they're very good at what they do, but security is not one thing that they are good at. And so therefore, you may have to, as a security professional, teach them on what are some key concepts to consider as they're developing their software. Now, how does SDLC work? It's an iterative approach to the software process, right? That's the whole path behind it. They're from bug fixes, fixing issues with the code, usability issues, that would be your user experience, user interface, your error with applications. All of these would need to be addressed through the software development lifecycle. And these typically run in cycles, which I mentioned before. You either have, there's spiral, there's waterfall, there's agile. And we'll get into those here in the next part of the podcast. But the bottom line is that you pick up things. So let's just say you're going to have an enhancement on a website, and you want to have this button, instead of it being orange, you want it to be blue. Now, in a perfect world, if you've ever done websites, you go, I'll just jump in there and I make a change. That's fine if you have a WordPress website, but if you're dealing with something that's complex, that maybe takes orders and provides invoices and all those aspects that are much more complex than just I'm going to go change the color blue. And if you go to SeanGerber.com, I use a site called Kajabi. I can go in and I can change the color from an orange button to a blue button, or vice versa. It's real simple. But as you deal with these complex issues of a multi-size site that's maybe got multi-tenants involved, you have to have a process by which, okay, we put this into a sprint. And the sprint is, it begins, we make the change to the color goes from blue to orange, and then we test to make sure that the code is good. And the fact that then once all of that is complete, that would be an item that would be in that sprint. If that's an agile sprint, that's a 2-week sprint. Typically, it would be in there as one of many things that would be done. Now, waterfall might be set up so that you may have a long period of time. It might be like a whole group of things. And this one changing of this one button is one task in that overall process. But it's just how to iterate, how it goes back to looking at how do you want to handle that sprint. So you just have to decide which works best for you. But it runs in cycles, and it's an ongoing basis. And then when you're dealing with security, you have to look at it from an ongoing standpoint. Now, according to Raygun, there are 7 phases of the SDLC. The first one is planning. The planning phase involves aspects of project and product management. So again, this comes into resource allocation, capital capacity planning, project scheduling, cost estimation, provisioning, and so forth. Those are usually done by project managers and then some of the development staff. And that's the planning piece, right? You figure out what you're going to do. So when they're planning these pieces out, you also need to consider and teach them about security and why is that working. Because you would also have some level of operations or security involved in the development of the software. Now, the second thing is requirements. The business must communicate with IT teams, conveying what their actual requirements are for the new development that needs to occur. And then you have your subject matter experts that are in there learning and growing, and they gather this information from what the actual customer wants. Now, in many cases, you may need to have an architect in there as well to help if it's going to be some large changes. And the architect will also give a security spin on it. Hopefully they will. That's the point. And the output of this phase will be in a waterfall or agile kind of methodology, which we talked about. Agile is 2 weeks. You start off with all your requirements. You start off with what your stories are. They call them user stories. And then what do they want them to look like? They build that out. Then they do these things. And at the end of it, they have testing before they provide that to the customer. Now, once the design and prototyping is the next step, or I should say, once the requirements are completed, then you roll into the design and prototyping piece of this. And this is where the requirements are understood. Software architects and developers can begin the software process. Developers will use design patterns basically to accomplish what they want to do. And there will be an output phase that will be completed with the end of the design. And so a lot of times they call those wireframes. They'll build out the sketch of what they want it to be, and then they'll pass that information on to the developer. So the better the requirements you can put out there, the better the user stories, which is basically the definition of what they want to accomplish, then that the developers will have a better opportunity to create a really good product. Now, this is where it moves into phase 4, which is your software development. And this is the part where the software is actually created by the developers. And they utilize the sprints that we had talked about. Either it's a single block effort, which is waterfall, or a sprint, which would be agile. And again, your CISSP, you're going to need to know these and what and how these work. From a testing standpoint, that's the next phase that you would roll into, is that you want, once the software development is done, then it would provide a testable functional piece of software. Now, it's going to have bugs, but that's where the testing piece comes into play, which is phase 5. The testing piece this is where one of the most important pieces of the phases, because you have to figure out how good is the code quality and do you have issues with it. Now, I've run into issues with testing in the past where you'll get somebody that'll throw code together, it'll work, they'll want to just brush through the testing piece and move on to user acceptance testing. And that's a bad idea, just because the fact of it is that if you don't have a good standardization around coding, you don't have a good standardization for your third parties to code, it will cause all kinds of issues, lots of issues, from being insecure from a security standpoint to just usability. It just doesn't work well. So there's a wide variety of issues, and Raygun talks about this. You got one is code quality, 2 is unit testing, which is your functional tests, integration testing, performance testing, and security testing. Those are the main big buckets that you'll fall under the testing piece. Now, in many cases, the security testing is forgotten about. People don't do it a lot. And this what one of the ideas around a security test would be if you have an input field. So you have a field that says, I want to enter in a name. What will happen is you can set the characters of that name to a very large subset. So let's say it's, instead of for Sean, S-H-O-N, which is really simple, there's only 4 letters in my name, you could say, we're going to make the input field only 10 letters long so that we know Sean or Billy Smith, if that's your first name, you get 2 first names, if Billy Smith is long enough to be put in the input field. Now, the problem with that is if you set it's really tight with 10 characters is all that can be put in that input field, then what ends up happening? It breaks, so you got issues. So a lot of times developers will decide, you know what, rather than put a limit on the input field name characters, we're just going to go and let it allowed to the default, which in many cases I've seen is around 255 characters. Sometimes bad guys can turn around and use that in code, and they can do injects into that code. And it would be like a SQL injection if you have a SQL database on the back end. They could do an injection that would actually cause issues with your site. And so the developers need to put in limits on saying no special characters are allowed in the username. No, it has a limited subset of only 20 characters for the first name. Those type of things are aspects where the developers would have to put in while they're testing this out. And if they have good coding quality and they already have that set up as a standard process, then it works really well. So that's the testing piece of this. And there's a really good site out there, a Pluralsight, where it's Troy Hunt talks about how to basically hack yourself. And that's a really good piece to understand how does that work and what were some of the things that you'd put in place to hack yourself as it relates to your website. Now, the 6th phase would be deployment. Deployment phase is ideally a highly automated phase. You deal with automated testing. I highly recommend you do this. I'm not at that point yet. We're in the process of building that out. But an automated testing is an incredibly important piece where you don't have to have people manually going and checking everything. Because guess what? People are fallible. They'll make mistakes. They'll skip over things. Whereas the robot, it doesn't do it. Now, it doesn't work for everything. It's not 100% foolproof, but it will get a lot of the big rocks moved that you need moved. Also consider a continuous deployment model, which is, a lot of times they talk this CI/CD, which is your continuous integration, continuous deployment. Those are really good things to consider if you have any sort of influence on your development team. And it's highly likely they've already thought of this, but the simple fact of the matter is deployment is really an important phase, and it's important that you automate that as much as you possibly can. But that would also be in the security testing as well. That needs to be automated. Now, phase 7, operations and maintenance. This is where we actually end, and this is where the product that would be provided to the user. Now, there'll be user acceptance testing, which is UAT, which would be in phase 6. But when it's an operation maintenance, that's where everything should work. Now, if there's bug issues when this thing gets deployed, they can go back and do regression and regress back to an old version. So regression testing is another version of testing that you'll see in phase 6. But bottom line is at phase 7, this is where it comes out to the user, and the user then is able to use it in their environment. Now, if there are bug fixes that need to be addressed after it's been running, then what would happen is those bug fixes will be put back into another sprint in a future event. Depending upon how critical they are, that's how they would be decided upon putting back into a future sprint. So the bottom line is there are 7 phases, and Raygun gets into those, and they do fit really well within the CISSP exam. And you guys might be saying, why is this in there? But it's important from a software development. As you guys see the hacks that are occurring, having good integration with your software developers is important. So the 7 phases of SDLC is planning, requirements, design and prototyping, software development, testing, deployment, and 7 is operations and maintenance. Okay, so before we get started, we're going to roll about SeanGerber.com. You can go check out my website at Sean Gerber, that's SeanGerber.com. And you can check out the website there. You sign up for my email list, you'll get a plethora of information. We're going to have a bunch of stuff around exam questions that are going to be there available to you. There's also going to be an aspect around the different domains that I have available. You'll be getting all the podcasts that are there just by signing up and getting signed up within my email distribution list. The last thing I should say is that I have domains 1 through 8. The videos are all there and available for you. You just got to purchase those, and you can have access to all of the videos that I put together that will help you pass the CIE exam the first time. And that's all available. It's taken out of the official study guides, and have put that together. Plus, I've got my years of experience have been baked right into it. You need to go to SeanGerber.com, and you can check out that training. All right, so as we roll into Domain 8.1, we're going to talk about the various maturity models that are available. And we're going to talk about we mentioned before in the first part of this podcast was the various models. And what are these maturity models, and how do they help you get to where you want to go? Now, there's various ones that are out there, and I say the various multiple times, but there's multiple aspects of how you can do software development. And I had talked about how waterfall was a key piece, and also the agile model. But there's waterfall, spiral, agile, software capability, maturity, and ideal. Now, I'm just going to briefly go over the last ones, the software capability, maturity, and ideal. The main ones I'm going to focus on are waterfall and agile. Now, waterfall was developed in the 1970s, and it was a series of iterative activities in which you would do a method. So a good example is like we talked about before, where you have a software piece of that needs to be completed. You come up with an idea that needs to happen. You build a user story around it. It's built into an overarching program that you go from step A to step Z, right? Or Z for our friends that are in Europe. And what ends up happening is as you go through that process, that's when you would fix that button. Instead of being orange, you'd make it blue. The thing is, though, when they're waterfall, you cannot come back and make any changes to it until the entire process is over. So depending upon how big that waterfall project is, it could be some time before you come back and address that button from orange to blue. Versus in the agile method, which we'll talk about, it's usually about 2 to 3 weeks you could actually have that addressed. Now, if there's critical situations, you could do it sooner, but bottom line, you have to look at how fast you want to iterate through your software. So there's the series of iterative activities. There's system and software requirements, preliminary design, detailed design, coding and debugging, testing, and then operations maintenance. And so those are the primary 6 that are there used for the waterfall aspects. And again, we talked about those, and those all happen as well within the agile method, but the challenge is they go a little bit faster than they do with waterfall. Now, waterfall also provides feedback for defects. So if you see a defect while it's been this, let's just say it's a month-long arduous journey, there would be feedback, and then you would build that into future waterfall events. But that's the feedback occurs, but you can't make changes during that period. All you can do is just annotate the defects that are going on. Now, and this was the first attempt to model the software development process. And realistically, it's a good model. There's nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't allow you to have a very fast approach unless your waterfall projects are within 2-week increments. Now, the issues that come with this is developers are only able to step back one level. So if you have an issue, you can go back. If you're in the testing phase, you can go back to the code and debug phase, but you can't go back to the detailed design phase. So those are limits on what you have, and you'd have to come back, and if there was a problem with the overall design as you're in the testing phase, you can make changes to the code to hopefully fit your needs, but you can't go back to the detailed design and make the changes there. So that's a bit of a challenge with it. So again, if errors are discovered later down through the actual waterfall, there are limited mechanisms that you can put in place. As a result, there's verification, validation processes before you move on to the next step. So you have to validate and verify everything looks good before you move on from, let's say, detailed design into code and debugging. Now, the next model we're going to talk about is Agile. This was developed in the mid-1990s, and in 2001, there's the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. They have 12 key principles that they work through, but bottom line is through those principles, it will help you move through the Agile process. Now, there's various variants of Agile. There's Scrum, there's Agile Unified Process, Dynamic Systems Development Model, or Extreme Programming. So that's Scrum, Agile Unified Process, which is AUP, it's Alpha Uniform Papa, Dynamic Systems Development Model, which is DES, so Delta Sierra Delta Mike, and then there's Extreme Programming, which is your X-Ray Papa. Okay, so those are the various ones that are set up with Agile, and that's developed again in the mid-1990s. Yeah, so Agile, as you can see, that's the one that I've dealt with recently, and it's worked really well. I've been very big proponent of it. It does allow you to have a couple 2-week sprints. It allows it to be done quickly, so it's a really pretty cool aspect with Agile. Now, moving on to Software Capability Maturity Model. This came from Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon. The acronym is Sierra Whiskey Charlie Mike. That sounds like out of a movie, a war movie, Charlie Mike Mike. But this is what came directly from Carnegie Mellon. Now, the quality of the software directly is associated with the quality of the development. And they have various levels that are involved. And I'm briefly going to go over the levels because you can get into a lot of serious weeds when it comes down to how they're defined. But just going through the specific levels, there's level 1, which is your initial. Level 2, which is your repeatable. Level 3 is defined. Level 4 is managed. Level 5 is optimizing. And they follow on the fact that the initial one is where people are trying to get something accomplished, but there's little direction. So this is how they went down this path. Then they went to the repeatable aspects, and they looked for code or aspects that are duplicatable and thus can be reused. Now, there's a big positive with this because as you're getting into the world of low-code and no-code development, a lot of those are in blocks that could be reused. So if you can reuse the software, that's a big benefit. That doesn't mean you can't do that with the other models with Agile or Waterfall. You can. It's just this was designed around repeatable aspects. And then it was basically using how much of this code can I reuse and not have to redo over and over again. When you're talking to define, you set for a formal document the software development process, which is process focus, definition, training, and so forth. And then when you're dealing with manage, the management of the software process itself. It's who's going to manage the overall beginning to end software project management piece. Then level 5 is optimizing. This is the continuous improvement or change, and how do you make annotations for change within the software itself. So that's basically the one from Carnegie Mellon. Now we're going to roll into the ideal model, which is India Delta Echo Alpha Lima. And it's very similar to the Carnegie Mellon Charlie Mike, which their 5 phases are initiating, diagnosing, establishing, acting, and learning. So initiating is it's a business case for the change. Diagnosing is analyzing the current state, provide recommendations. Establishing is develop a plan from the diagnosing stage. The last one, or not the last one, Delta, the acting is develop a solution, test, adjust, and implement. Okay, so you're basically bracketing it. And then learning your quality improvement, and you're learning from your mistakes. So they fall all on the same process. The processes aren't that far off from each other. However, each of them has a different phases, and they have different way of doing business. So it's important for you to understand at a minimum when you're dealing with the CISSP exam, what are some of these maturity models and what is the purpose of them? But I will tell you, the typical ones that are used in the market today are Waterfall and Agile. All right, so we're going to roll into the CISSP exam questions for Domain 8. Now, as we're dealing with this, come from TechTarget, and TechTarget has a bunch of quizzes that are available for you to go out and check out, and I highly recommend you do that. But let's roll into question number 1. Abstract episodes of interaction between a system and its environment. Okay, so abstract episodes of interaction between a system and its environment. Okay, yeah, A is misuse cases, B is web proxies, C is use cases, D is negative testing. All right, so abstract episodes of interaction between a system and its environment. Now, we just got done talking about level 8, or about domain 8 and some of the aspects around that. That would be C, Charlie, use cases. Use cases are abstract episodes, and they're things that occur that are happening between the system and its environment, and therefore you utilize these use cases to help you make changes to your development environment. Question 2, a list of the most widespread and critical errors that can lead to serious vulnerabilities in software. Okay, so A is Information Security Continuous Monitoring, ISCM. B is CWE SANS Top 25 Most Dangerous Software Errors. I don't know if that exists. Yeah, actually it does. SANS has got one, and so does OWASP. C is Automated Vulnerability Scanners. And D is Real User Monitoring, RUM. Okay, so the list of the most widespread and critical errors that can lead to serious vulnerabilities in software: ISCM, SANS Top 25, Automated Vulnerability Scanners, or Real User Monitoring. And the answer is Information Security Continuous Monitoring, ISCM. All right, and we're rolling to the last question here. Now, before we do, one thing I want to mention about that is, again, keep in mind, these exam questions are not, when I was studying for the exams, I thought that, hey, I can study for these exams, master all these questions, and I can pass the test. That is not how the CISSP goes. And if you all have probably been studying these questions to know that you can take a bazillion of these exam questions and think, okay, I've got it down pat. The exam questions aren't going to help you pass the test, other than the fact they're going to teach you how are some of the questions being asked and how do you deduce what the actual answer is if you don't know the answer. So this is the design of the Reduce Cyber Risk podcast, and all of this training is to get more of this information into your cranium, so that way when you go to take the test, it makes sense and you can answer the questions correctly. It is not, unfortunately, to help you with passing the test from here's an exam question 3, this is on the test, wink. That's not the case. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're setting the expectation to take the CISSP. All right, question 3. This criteria requires sufficient test cases for each program statement to be executed at least once. However, its achievement is insufficient to provide confidence in a software product's behavior. Okay, so this criteria requires sufficient test cases for each program statement to be executed at least once. However, its achievement is insufficient to provide confidence in a software product's behavior. A, statement coverage. B, data flow coverage. C, condition coverage. D, path coverage. All right, and the answer is A, statement coverage. Basically, it talks about what is it being occurring with a criteria that's specifically for this test case. It's considered a statement coverage. All right, that's all I have for today, so I hope.
Hey, thanks again for listening today. It's been my pleasure to prep you for the CISSP exam. Are you interested, though, in some free CISSP exam questions? Head on over to freecisspquestions.com and sign up to join my email list, and you'll receive access for 60 free CISSP questions each and every month for the next 6 months. That's a total of 360 questions just for signing up with CISSP Cyber Training. You'll also gain access to other free CISSP resources, so just head on over to freecisspquestions.com and sign up, or head on over to CISSPcybertraining.com and sign up today. Have a wonderful day, and we will catch you on the flip side. See ya.